Joining me now in the studio is the author and commentator Douglas Murray to speak about his new book on democracies and death cults. Who can see that? There we are. Top pluggage for that. Douglas, lovely to see you.
So good to be with you.
Before we speak about this book, can we talk about what has happened in HMP Frankland in Durham? We've got the brother of the Manchester arena bomber, Hashem Abedi, having attacked 3 prison guards. They've got life-changing injuries, cooking oil thrown at them. They've also been stabbed. We think this is the second time this has happened, but crucially, it comes 9 days after officers at that prison reported that there was no point segregating the Islamic extremists in that prison anymore because most of the prison estate is indeed of that persuasion. What's your reaction to that story?
Well, obviously, it's a failing in the prison system, failing of security, obviously, the poor officers who've been attacked, evidence of that. I think that there's always in these things a tendency to look at the first bit of the problem and not at the wider problem. The wider problem includes not just why there are so many people in prison, the jihadists and set up gangs, effectively, in our prisons, but also this question that I've asked since the Manchester arena bomber was identified. Why were the Abedi family in Britain to begin with? We still don't know the answer to that. 8 years on, we just don't know the answer. Abedi's father seems to have fallen out with Colonel Gaddafi because they were from rival jihadist groups. So why is Britain the place where people who fall out with other jihadists come to continue their lives?
Also, why is the taxpayer paying for Abedi to be in prison if he's attacking officers, not just here, but also at Belmarsh, we believe? Why
any of the family here in the first place? There has been no inquiry so far as I know, no minister or Home Office official held accountable for this. And until we start holding people accountable for the decisions they make that are so terrible, nothing will change.
You might be familiar with Amjad Tatar. He came on the show some months ago. He's a Emirati sort of counter-Islamic extremism expert. And he made the point that he thinks there are more extremists in Britain than there are in the Middle East. I mean, it was quite the claim. He's making the point that, for instance, it is illegal in countries like Egypt and indeed the UAE to wave Hamas and Hezbollah flags. And he couldn't believe it that he came to London and saw them on the streets of the capital. Equally, he is wondering why on earth we haven't prescribed the Muslim Brotherhood. That's an organisation that is banned in Syria. What's your view on the current state of play with Islamic extremism in Great Britain? It's
the same it's been for years, and no one has changed it, Conservative or Labour. No one's going to change it. It's just too big a problem for them. They're much too frit to know what to do about it. You're completely right. I've spoken to many people in the UAE who have the same view as your guest. First of all, by the way, it's also illegal to fly the flags of prescribed terrorist organisations like Hamas and Hezbollah in the UK. The 2006 Anti-Terrorism Act made that illegal, the glorification of terror. But as you and your viewers know, it's one thing if the state has rules in this country. It's another thing whether the police and others actually police them and whether the CPS actually prosecutes for it. I have many friends from across the Middle East and elsewhere who are horrified by what is happening in our country. They are on top of much of this to differing degrees across that region. But here in the UK, they come and they just say, what are you allowing? One reason why we do allow it is because even after all of these years, we still don't understand it or want to confront it. I say we, I really mean government, politicians, Westminster. Well, that also plays into my next question about this watering down of these local inquiries into the grooming gangs. Now, Trevor Phillips, the former head of the Equality Commission, had suggested that was because Labour doesn't want to, quote, offend Pakistanis. Yes. Do you concur with that view? Why do you think, A, we haven't got a national inquiry, and B, what inquiries we are having seem to have been watered down? I'm not a fan of inquiries into this, I'll be frank. I think it's a distraction. I think it's lamentable that Angela Rayner and the Labour government have seen fit to not even have inquiries into this. But as I've said sometime in the last months, we've had plenty of inquiries into the rape gangs. We've had plenty. Where do they go? What happens? Who acts on them? Why are there no more prosecutions? Why is there not a speed up in the number of prosecutions? The number of victims versus the number of people prosecuted in the last 2 decades does not stack up. And when I hear people saying, oh, this is going to upset the Pakistani community and so on, I say, first of all, why would they be upset? If members of my community were found to be gang raping girls based on their race, I would want to know about it, and I'd want those people to be prosecuted. I'd be very shameful about it, but I would want those people to go to prison. So why is it upsetting to Pakistani communities in the UK? And why, after all of these years, do we have people saying, oh, it's racist or Islamophobic or much more to even mention this? Sorry, it is too late in the day to play those games, and we should be utterly intolerant of anyone at this stage in 2025 knowing what we know about these mass crimes, claiming that the best thing you can do with it is to have yet another inquiry, which will be shelved by yet another government and nothing happening. It's time that we actually did things in this country instead of just doing inquiries into them.
We learned this morning that the Rotherham gang got 600 grand in legal aid to defend their case.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, those are one of the relatively few gangs that actually, not enough people were prosecuted, but one of the very few ones where that was actually prosecutions. Some of the members of that gang, they also made sure that they gave up their Pakistani passports because the state acts so slowly here, and then they're only on a British passport, and then you can't deport them. It's the whole thing is lamentable. And until a government gets this in its grip and deals with it, we should keep shouting from the rooftops about this.
I should point out, actually, that was a GB News exclusive, the 600 grand on legal aid. And as you'll know, Charlie Peters,
yes,
my GB News colleague, has done a lot of work on this.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the book. Why did you decide to write it?
Two reasons. The atrocities of October the 7th, 2023 are a type of atrocity that we have seen elsewhere in the West, in the Manchester Arena bombing, the Ariana Grande bombing, the Bataclan massacre in Paris, the Pulse nightclub attack in Orlando, Florida. But this was on a scale far, far beyond them even. This was 1,200 people massacred in a morning, including at a dance party in the south of Israel, by jihadists, Hamas, who committed crimes so appalling I can't describe some of them on air. They also kidnapped 250 Israelis from their homes. I noticed very early in this that two things would happen. One was there was a great risk that the actual crimes, the atrocities, were not going to be documented enough. The world was going to pass over them and talk about Israel's military response to get back the hostages and to kill the leadership of Hamas. I wanted to go, and I did go straight away to speak to the survivors, the families, the wounded, people in the hospitals, and much more, and tried to make sure that I had as good a sense of the day as it's possible to get. Second thing was that I was embedded with the IDF in Gaza and Lebanon and Israel and elsewhere to make sure that I saw firsthand, and I recount in the book, how the IDF responded to this atrocity. But the third thing, which was on my mind from October the 8th, was what has gone wrong in the rest of the West? What has gone wrong in the UK? That, as we know, the Telegraph splashed the story a few weeks ago. On the day of October the 7th, so-called pro-Palestinian groups, who are actually just anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, pro-Hamas, organized demonstrations for that night and the night after. In what other world are 1,200 people burned alive in their homes, raped and beheaded, and people in our society immediately decide to victimize the victims?
Yes.
And this is the question I ask in the book, among other things, is what has gone wrong here that we have, from days after October the 7th, hundreds of thousands of people on our streets celebrating the death cult of Hamas, not siding with a democracy like Israel, an ally of ours that makes mistakes like all allies do, but not siding with our allies, but siding with the death cult. This is an enormous civilizational challenge to us in Britain, in America, in the rest of the West. And until we grasp the obscenity of what has happened on our streets in the last 18 months, what has been happening in our mosques, in our streets, we will not address this problem, and the problem that Israel has stared in the face of will happen here as well.
Well, what is to blame for this figure? A poll last year of British Muslims taken by the Henry Jackson Society found that only 25% believed that rapes or murders had actually taken place on October the 7th.
It's an utter obscenity, and it points to how many sick people there are in our society. we have had in the last 10 years a slogan in the wake of Me Too and so on, believe all women. But it turns out that the rule doesn't apply if the women are Jews, if the women are Israelis. I have seen the evidence of this. I have spoken to the people who have gone through this, the victims of rapes on the 7th and people who saw the dead bodies of women who've been raped. The idea that we have such a sick coterie in our country that does not believe raped women because the people who carried out the attacks are Hamas or the people who suffered them are Israelis is, again, a problem in our society here. If this happened with any other group of people, if there were thousands or hundreds of thousands of people in the UK who did not believe it when I don't know, let's play it another way around. If a Muslim woman in the UK said she'd been raped by white men, Jess Phillips and everybody else would be all over that. We would know the name of the one case where that had happened, especially if it was for racial and religious reasons. But Jess Phillips and co, they don't care if, first of all, the victims don't suit their victim hierarchy, and secondly, if the perpetrators aren't comfortable for them.
So there may be sinister motivations behind people not believing that Israeli women were raped and tortured before they were murdered on October the 7th. It could be born out of ignorance. It could be because pro-Palestinianism has become a popular cause in our university campuses. It could be a kind of following of a herd mentality.
Or all of the above.
Yeah.
And people, of course, don't forget, a lot of people need to be taught into hatred. You have to be taught into it. We have to ask ourselves, why is this being taught? Why is pro-extremist ideology being pushed in this country? Why are we so far behind tackling it still? It goes back to my point. Look at the number of reports and inquiries. Every time an atrocity happens in the UK, we have another darn report, another inquiry.
Lessons will be learned.
And the lessons never are learned. Unless we grapple with this in Britain today, we will see what Israel suffered again here in the UK.
But isn't propaganda also part of the explanation? You probably have to accept, as I do too, that Israel has lost the war on social media when it comes to informing the public about what's happened. How much of the data out of Gaza do you think is trustworthy? Because it's very difficult. I know you've been very close, but you can't get British journalists in there to verify much.
Well, I've been in there plenty, and other journalists have been, actually. I've been in Gaza with other British journalists.
OK, so it is possible to get better data than that supplied by the Palestinian health authorities?
That's tricky because, of course, Hamas still runs Gaza. And the BBC and others run the Hamas health ministry figures as if they're legitimate. Undoubtedly, there have been civilian casualties in Gaza. Undoubtedly, Hamas has talked them up. But equally undoubtedly, Hamas started the war. Hamas is losing the war. That means that Hamas fighters are being killed at a very high rate. The Hezbollah and Hamas leadership has been decimated in the last 18 months. But fourthly, yes, because of the nature of which the death cult of Hamas operates, they deliberately, and this cannot be said often enough, they deliberately flout every law of war and make sure that every law of war that the IDF uses is used against them. It is not meant to be permitted to dress as a civilian whilst being a fighter, to hide in civilian houses, to fire RPGs from mosques, to shoot from hospitals, to hold hostages in basements of hospitals, to use civilian houses as torture chambers. There was one guy, I mention him in the book, among the 4 so-called Al Jazeera journalists who were killed, who Al Jazeera said, oh, these are just innocent journalists. One of the journalists in question was shown when the IDF collected laptops in Gaza to be one of the heads of Hamas's rocket department. So, innocent journalists, but just built rockets in the evening, as I'm sure you and I do, Camilla. We'll leave this studio and go straight back to RPG assemblement.
Yes, indeed.
And the second one on that quickly was that one of the people who contributed to Al Jazeera and other media during this war wrote all these pieces about how terrible it was for the citizens of Gaza to suffer the IDF's retaliation for the 7th. Forgot to mention to his readers that he was holding Israeli hostages in the basement of his house where he was torturing them every day.
Although the IDF have made mistakes themselves.
For
We've
sure.
had that aid convoy, 15 aid workers, we believe, killed recently.
Well, that's still being disputed, but I don't doubt that there will be innocent people who have been killed. And the reason for that is that Hamas travels in ambulances, in aid convoys. It uses every single thing it can. And until people realize that one of the things about the death cult mindset is the society we are from wants to minimize civilian casualties. Hamas thrives on civilian casualties. We love life, they love death. And the literal taunt of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the others is that the Westerners, the liberal democratic Western mindset believes in life, and they believe that's something they can use against us. I say it's one of our virtues.
Douglas Murray, thank you very much indeed. Your book on democracies and death cults is out now. If you want to read more about this, thank you very much indeed.